Where do you want to start with this? The best rosters in the NFL. You want to start at the top? Who's the best?
Yeah.
Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree?
Agree. The Bills are the top team in most people's power rankings. They are the favorite. Am I correct in saying that? The betting favorite for the Super Bowl at the moment. And they rank number one in this roster breakdown, and those things are connected. The Bills have the best roster in the NFL. That's why they're the favorites, right? The fact that they didn't make it as far as other teams last season, the playoffs, like we know, like in the playoffs, they were the favorite. They were dominating. They were on a really good run, and they came 13 seconds away from knocking over the Chiefs. Who knows if they'd have beaten the Bengals or not, but like we're not a million miles away from last season's Buffalo team being a Super Bowl team. And this season's version added players like Von Miller to address one of their biggest weaknesses. Not biggest weaknesses, but an area of concern, I guess. It's a really good roster.
When you were out, we had Greg Rosenthal on the show. We did something similar because he was going through each of the rosters and kind of ranking them. And I think we came to the conclusion, if I remember correctly, that the Bills also, on that show, he had said they were number one. The one place where we talked about maybe there's some concern is the offensive line. The idea that there's a little bit of turnover there. There's a little bit more pressure on second-year tackle Spencer Brown, a guy like Ryan Bates who has played well at guard in limited time. You bring in a Roger Saffold who's a very good veteran but had a rough year last year in pass protection with the Titans. That could be the place, right? I mean, the offensive line, we always talk about the Bills as this kind of standard for building around the young quarterback, right? They got the offensive line to manageable, crept back toward average, and then stacked up playmakers for Josh Allen, and that coincided directly with his development. But this actually could be the worst offensive line he has since year one for Josh Allen. I don't think it's a disaster or anything like that. I still think it's in the middle of the pack in the NFL, but I do wonder if that is the potential weakness on this team. On the bright side, you mentioned they bring in Von Miller, draft Kaiir Elam to be that number 2 cornerback opposite Tre'Davious White. You lose Levi Wallace in the process, but yes, handling some of those places with good players like Von Miller, first-round pick at corner, I think should make Bills fans feel pretty good.
Yeah, their offensive line doesn't look great on paper. On the other hand, it kind of never does. Like that's part of, I think, their strategy on the offensive line has been kind of what we preached, creep back toward average, but they're not so much creeping back there. They're there. They've been average, and they're trying to maintain average. And their strategy, I think, for maintaining average is let's just assemble as many average players on the offensive line as humanly possible. Teams kind of platoon 9 guys on the offensive line. If we get 9 average guys, the chances of us having a terrible offensive line are pretty small. I think that's been their plan. It's worked. The only worry about that is it is a small chance, but it's still there. Nobody plays at the same level every single year. So if you get 5 average guys, you're going to get this range of outcomes every single year for each one of those guys. And if like 3 of them, hit the bad end in a given season, all of a sudden your offensive line becomes a problem because now you got 3 below average players versus 2 guys that aren't offsetting it by being superstars, are maybe offsetting it by above average play if you get the other end of the variance. And now still you've got kind of 3 weak links on an offensive line, and that is kind of problematic. And I think the Bills flirted with that a little bit last season, and I think that's the one kind of flaw with that strategy, as I think that's always a threat. Like at any given moment, 3 of those guys could be a problem because none of them are great.
They also, I should have mentioned, they bring in David Quessenberry too. So he's got a history of being average, had a good year last year run blocking. Our listeners are so astute. When the Bills signed Greg Van Roten, who is, one of those guys that you just described, somebody's like, PFF Steve must love this. Yes, I do. Greg Van Roten, a guy that plays guard and could be decent and has been decent, whatever. So the Bills have a really good roster. I agree. They're very good. They replaced Cole Beasley with Jamison Crowder, Gabriel Davis on the outside. We'll see if he continues to develop. And, if the star power that he showed in the playoffs, I don't want to overrate just the playoff run because he'd been good previously too. But if he handles a little bit more volume opposite Stephon Diggs, those are all the things that people are looking at when they rank the Bills really high from a roster standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of rosters, you can find an obvious area of weakness and say this is the thing that's going to cause some problems. it's tough to find that with Buffalo. And okay, some of it relies on rookies coming in and playing, and that can be risky. You know, James Cook has the potential to propel this team in a different direction on offense, but they're kind of insulated. If James Cook doesn't do that, if he stinks, if he's not good, doesn't matter. They're in the same position as last year in terms of running backs. Kyer Elam comes in at corner. Again, the potential is there for him to be a much better player than the player he replaced. And that, I think, insulates him from the idea that if he doesn't play that well. Like Levi Wallace played reasonably well for particularly his sort of play is more relative to his story, right? Like former walk-on at Alabama, goes from walk-on to undrafted to, clinging on to a starting job for a few years. He has a reasonably easy job opposite Tre'Davious White, which helps. That all translates to Kyer Elam as well, right? Rookie corner doesn't often lead to dramatic success. On the other hand, he's going to have the same benefit of that relatively easy job opposite Tre'Davious White, and he doesn't have to be great to be better than the guy he's replacing.
I was deep in the research the other day, and I proved it that Levi Wallace may have a slightly easier job than Tre'Davious White.
I'm not interested in any data point that tells me that Levi Wallace is going to
I know
be
you love
bad in
Levi
Pittsburgh,
Wallace,
which I suspect might happen.
but I may have stumbled upon an insight that corners play into the boundary, the short side of the field, which doesn't matter as much in the NFL theoretically, the boundary versus the field, that those guys, the boundary corner, the guy that's closest to the ball, actually has it a little bit more difficult. Playing the X receiver, specifically, usually playing the X receiver, whatever it might be. And Levi plays to the field a lot. That's all.
Okay.
Just saying. Maybe he had a slightly easier path. That's helping his grade along just a little bit.
Yeah, but the point being, that should also help Kyer Elam adjust.
Agreed. Absolutely.